Again, the whole goal of this is to get one field that we can join on. We need to join on two in reality, city and date. Power BI only allows us to merge on one. So we created one combined column, kind of some Power BI gymnastics. There we go. Merge key and merge key. And again, we can go to our data table view within the main Power BI screen here and kind of see some examples of that, just like we did in the Power Query Editor. It looks good. Now we're going to the model view. This is important. Go into the model view, and we're going to link these together. So I'm finding merge key in this data set, and I'm going to drag it over the equivalent field. They don't have to be called the same thing, but they need to represent the same thing, and they do. In this case, city, comma, state, dash, date. We'll drag those together, and there we go. Now, you can kind of see the arrow here. If I can double click on this arrow and I can adjust this, if I wanted to now link on different fields, I could just highlight another field, but we ultimately want it to be highlighted merge key in the games data set, links to merge key in the weather data set. Cross filter direction, you can see it's set up where weather would filter games. That's okay. I think we can have it filter both directions. Keep in mind that if no weather filter is applied, then it's not going to impact the game's data set at all. So it's not like it's going to filter out rows from the game's data set if that date city doesn't exist in the weather data set. We know there's going to be cases like that, but it won't filter them out until we apply a weather filter. And we'll do an example of that. I'm just going to go with both right here. So that means if you apply a filter on the game's data set, it'll apply to the weather's data set and vice versa. Okay. Now you'll notice this icon is going to have an arrow pointing both ways. And this is really neat. I think this is special about Power BI. I think it's very intuitive. If you want to see more columns, you can stretch it out. And you can imagine if you had even more tables, you can basically build a relationship diagram with this of how all these tables will relate together. That's an important thing to do if you're bringing in multiple tables. Now, it's possible they should be seen completely separately, but if you do treat them that way, then one table's filters aren't going to impact any visualizations that are built on another table. So in this case, when we apply like a temperature filter, which would be applied to temperature. The temperature field is in the weather data set. It will filter down to just those games that were played in that temperature in the games data set because we've linked them. If we hadn't linked them, that would not be the case. So this is just one example. Again, the whole reason we brought in the weather piece, it could be interesting to see some trends of whether certain teams do well in certain types of weather. But the real reason we brought it in was to show this example of linking data sets together. There's all kinds of reasons you might need to do that. In this particular use case, I probably, if both of these were in a SQL database, would have written a SQL query and done a join, probably a left join to bring in the average temperature into the games data set. And then I would have just had one data set. Games would have had average temperature as a column, would be missing if it didn't exist in the weather data set. That's how I would handle it if I were bringing it in as a SQL query. Here we are, we've brought it in. Now you know how to link tables using the model view in Power BI. All right, well, let's go to our report view, and I think it's time to start doing some DAX some DAX coding. So before we get started with really building out some visuals, we're going to create some measures. And before we can create measures, the measures we're going to create, we're going to need to create some columns. Now we've got plenty of columns. All of these are columns, and you can see the different data types. You can see how start date, before it was a number, it had a sum sign next to it, but now it's a calendar icon, and it's a date. And one way you can also check to see what the date type is to click on a field, and then up here under column tools that will appear when you click on that field, it'll tell you exactly what type of date it is. You can even format that field here as well. So for instance, right now it's showing the weekday. We don't need the weekday. Now, these games do go back to 1936, so I'm probably going to include the 4-digit year, but I like this format right here. It shows you an example, 3/14/2001. That's a pretty good format. We don't need the weekday. that just adds a lot of space that we don't need. I'm going to click on this one and convert it to that format. And I'll do the same thing for start date. It's already in the date format, but we're going to change the format that it shows up in. Looks good. All right. Now we'll ultimately bring these into a table and see how that looks for the particular start date and last refreshed. Now, before we can create the columns that we need to create the measures, we're actually going to create a few additional tables. So we're going to show how to actually create a calculated table. That's kind of a crazy concept. I get creating columns. I might do that in Excel or SQL all the time. I get creating measures, some products and weighted averages, that type of thing. But creating a table, how do you create a table? Well, we'll go to the modeling tab here, and we're going to click on new table ultimately. All right, so we're going to create a away table and a home table. See, the thing about these games are that you've got a home team and an away team. So imagine eventually putting filters over here, and maybe you put a filter for the home team, and you've got a particular team that you follow that you want to see their stats. Maybe at Ohio State, we'll look at some of their data. I'm going to filter on Ohio State, and I want to see all of Ohio State's games. I want to see their winning percentage, right? Well, if I filter on home team of Ohio State, guess what? I'm only seeing the winning percentage and all the stats for cases where Ohio State was the home team. I miss all the away team cases. And so what we're ultimately going to do is create games from a home team perspective and games from an away team perspective, union those together in such a way where now we'll have just a team that you filter on. And if I choose Ohio State, I now see a list of home games and away games. So we're going to need to kind of union the data to get that to work. We need to kind of duplicate the data. Well, I could import games all over again and do all those ETL steps again. No way. I just want to create a copy of games. And so a way I can do that is to go to the modeling tab and click on new table. Again, we're going to create a home games and an away games table. I'm going to call this home games. And the simplest way to create a new table, if you're just creating a copy, is just to start typing the table name, and there's games. Create that. Watch this. Over here in the data table, home games. Exact same fields as before. And I'm going to do that again. In fact, what I'll probably do is just copy this formula over here. So what happens is, in order to get that formula, I need to click on a calculated item, so home games, and then again, formula bar. This is a formula bar in the main Power BI screen, the report view, versus before we were in the Power Query editor, and we saw how helpful that formula bar was. It's pretty helpful in the report view as well. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to create another new table because I need to create one of these for away games. It's going to be the same thing, except this time it's a copy of games just like the home teams was, but this time I'm going to call it away games. And now I'm going to have a fourth table over here. And if we go to the table view, you can see that home games looks exactly like away games, looks exactly like games. They're all copies of the games table. Great. Well, again, why did we do that? Why did we have to create just a regular copy? Well, we're going to do some refinements to each of these. We're going to create some fields based on, we'll start with the home games table. We're going to create some calculated columns based on the fields from a home team's perspective. So right now, home games is the same as games. It is a table that is one row per game, but it has columns for the home team and the away team. Now we're going to create a column, and a column is essentially a row level piece of information. Just like there's home team, there's away team, all kinds of fields about that particular thing that one row represents in the data set. Right now, games data set is one row per game. And so every column represents an attribute about that game. So if you're planning on adding some kind of attribute about a game in this case, that's going to be a good column example. versus eventually we're going to create measures, and measures are aggregations across games, like a winning percentage that you might want to calculate for across all the games in a season and get one number. What was your winning percentage? That's a good measure use case. So any kind of aggregation, sum, max, min, average, first, last, all of those are measure cases that we'll eventually create as well. But when you want to create something at the row level, not aggregated, at the row level, add an additional attribute to your table, that's a good column use case. So the column we want to create in this case, we're creating columns from a home team perspective on top of our games data set. We created a copy of the games data set. The very first one we want to create, and you can see the formula here, it's just there's going to be a column name. In this case, we're going to call it, start defaults to column. We're going to call ours team, and it equals the home team. So we're going to pull, and you can see that this first part represents the data set. So since we're building a column in the home games data set, it's bringing up columns from the home games data set. Since this is from the home team's perspective, the team variable is going to be the home team. There we go. And we'll do all of this kind of likewise in the away team data set as well. So before we move on to a different column, I'm going to kind of copy this concept, and we're going to go to the away games. Now, there's a few options to do this. I could either select the away games and then click on new column, and it'll create it in that table, or I'll just click on the triple dots next to away games, and I'll say new column. So we're creating another column in the away team data set. Now team, the team variable in the away team data set is going to equal the away team. Now it says home games and home team, so I'll just start this part over and just say away team. That should bring up, yep, away team. There we go. So in the away games data set, the team variable is the away team. It's from the away team's perspective. In the home games data set, the team is the home team. It's from the home team's perspective. And likewise, we'll do the same thing with conference and some of the other variables that we want to use as well. So new column here. Now we'll do conference equals home conference. Does some autocomplete for us, which is nice. And likewise, we'll do the same thing in our away games, triple dots, new column. We're going to create a conference variable in the away games table as well. Conference equals away team conference in the away table. Now it's really important that we create these columns in the same order in both data sets. We could create all of the columns we're creating at once in one data set, but then we'd have to also create them in the exact same order in the other data set, because what's happening behind the scenes, let's create this. Now we're going back to the table view. Notice in the away games data set, the first column it created was team, then conference. That's because first we added the team column and then the conference column. If we'd added conference first, then it would be first and then team. No issue with that, but what we're ultimately going to do is add these, we're going to append these, union them together, and they need to be in the same order as in the away games table, as in the home team, the home games table. So if I create these in the same order in each table, that'll be fine. It'll be really easy to append or union them. So we've done that. We've got our new calculated columns, and you can see that they're calculated columns based on this function icon next to team and next to conference. But we're going to do a few more here. So let's go back to the home one, new column. So another way, again, if you could either do the triple dots or click within the home games over here in the data pane, and then click new column, and it knows to put that column in the home games table. The next column is going to be called points. And you might have guessed it, we're going to take the home team points because this is in the home games table. I'm going to give it the same name, but in the away games table, just like we've been doing, it's going to be the away points. points equals away points. All right, let's get, well, there's a few things we need to get, I suppose. Home games, we need to start talking about the opponent now. So we'll go back to home games, triple dots, new column, opponent. Well, the opponent from a home game perspective is going to be the away team. Do the same thing in the away teams, new column. And opponent from an away team perspective would be the home team. And let's see, let's bring in their conference. So back to the home games, new column, opponent conference. That could be interesting to look at. So if we're talking about the home games, that is the away conference. And then if we go to the away games, add another column there for the opponent conference. Opponent conference equals, yes, the home conference. And then we need to bring in the opponent's points. So going back to home games, new column would be the away team's points. And in the away games table, the opponent points would be the home team's points. Okay, so in the away games table and in the home games table, we've created a team variable that's from the home team's perspective, if it's in the home games table, and the away team's perspective, if it's in the away team, if it's in the away games table. The team's conference, the points, and then the opponent and the opponent's conference and the opponent's points. And guess how we're going to bring these tables together? You got it, another calculated table. So we'll go back to the modeling tab, click new table, and we're going to call this combined games. Combined games, and we're going to use a function called union. It's just simply called union, similar to how it's called in SQL. But it's a union function, and so it takes open parentheses, and then we're going to feed it the arguments. And the arguments would be, well, we want to union the home game table, the first table, with the away games table. Close parentheses, combined games. We should see another table over here called combined games, and there it is. Let's go to the tables view here. Now here's a great check for us. We can look and see for the combined games, that's what's selected, there are 156,000 games, 156,000 rows. And then if we click on just the regular games, 78,000, there's half. That makes sense, right? Because we've essentially doubled the size of the table by bringing in games from the away games perspective, which is also 78,000, and from the home team's perspective, which is also 78,000 rows. So it makes sense that concatenating them together would be 156,000. Great, it's a good check. So now we're ready, now that we have this combined games, that is really going to be the data set we use for basically all of our visualizations, is this combined games. If you like this video, I hope you'll consider liking it for me. And if you'd like to see more analytics, data science, and leadership training videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Finally, if you have any questions on what we discussed today, please leave a comment and I'll try to respond to it as soon as possible. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.